The war had been going on for 300 years. Captain Amanda Brooks stood on the bridge of her ship and watched the stars her human frigate moved slowly through the debris field. Broken pieces of rock floated everywhere around them. This used to be a moon once, but now it was just scattered chunks of stone and metal. The war between the Stellar Coalition and the Void Swarm had destroyed so many worlds. Amanda had been fighting for 10 years and she was tired. Her crew was tired too. They all wanted to go home, but home was far away, and the fighting never seemed to end. The sensors started beeping loudly. Something was wrong. Amanda walked closer to the main screen and looked at the readings. There was a structure hidden in the debris. Very old structure, older than anything they had ever seen before. The computer could not tell how old it was because it was too ancient. Amanda called her science officer over. The woman studied the readings and her eyes went wide. This was something from before the war, for the Coalition, before any of the current civilizations existed. They had found something from the precursors. The precursors were the first intelligent species in the galaxy. Everyone knew the stories about them. They had built amazing things and then disappeared millions of years ago. No one knew what happened to them. Now Amanda and her crew had found one of their structures. She sent a message to Coalition headquarters immediately. This was too important for just one ship to handle. Within days, other ships started arriving. Scientists came from every corner of Coalition space. They brought their best equipment, and their smartest people among them was someone very special. Her name was Lyran Silver Vivj, was an elf, not just any elf, but a battle mage with 300 years of experience. Eliarin arrived on a ship made of crystal that glowed with inner light, but what made everyone stare was what came with Hera Dragon. His name was Zephyrraxi, was massive. His scales were not like normal dragon scales. They shimmered with energy fields that could stop weapons. His eyes were old and wise. He had lived for thousands of years. The dragon and the elf had been partners for centuries. They had fought in countless battles together. Now they were here because the elves had been searching for precursor vaults for generations there. Ancient texts spoke of weapons so powerful they could end any war with a single strike. Lyrian believed this vault held such a weapon. Everyone gathered at the entrance to the megastructure. Building was enormous. It hung in space like a small moon itself fits. Walls were made of materials that should not exist, materials that were stronger than anything modern science could create. The entrance was covered in symbols, strange symbols that glowed with soft blue light. They moved and shifted, constantly changing into new patterns. Every few hours, Lyrain stepped forward first, placed her hand on the symbols and closed her eyes. Her telepathic abilities were legendary. She could read minds and sense thoughts across vast distances, but the symbols gave her nothing. They were blank, empty of meaning. She tried for hours. The dragon Zephyrrax came next. He breathed on the symbols, not fire, but something else. Intelligence flowed from his mouth in waves of golden light. Dragons remembered things that other species had forgotten. They carried memories in their blood from the beginning of time, but even Zephyrrax could not understand the symbols. Coalition brought in their quantum computers, machines that could process billions of calculations per second. They scanned the symbols from every angle. They tried every known language, every code, every mathematical formula. Nothing worked. The symbols just kept changing, arranging themselves into new patterns that made no sense. Darhelena Grant was the Coalition chief xenolinguist, had spent her entire life studying alien languages, had decoded communications from species that thought in colors instead of words, but these symbols defeated her. Professor Amy Thornton came to Ashi, was an elf who had devoted 200 years to studying the precursors. She had read every text, visited every known precursor site. She thought she understood how they thought, but she was wrong. Days turned into weeks. The best minds in the galaxy stood before the vault and accomplished nothing. Frustration grew, tempers flared, arguments broke out between the scientists. Some wanted to try to force the door open. Others said that would destroy whatever was inside. Aline sat in meditation for days at a time. Her violet eyes grew dim with exhaustion. She had been so certain she would be the one to solve this. The elves needed this vault. They needed the weapon inside. The war was going badly for them. Zephyrrax paced back and forth in the massive chamber. His tail sparked against the ancient metal floor. He was agitated. Dragons did not like being defeated by puzzles. Meanwhile, on one of the human colony ships, a girl named Katie Martinez was supposed to be. In class, he was 12 years old. Her mother, Nicole Martinez, was a lieutenant working on the expedition support crew. Katie was supposed to stay in the education pod with the other children, but Katie had never been good at following rules. She was curious too. Curious, her teacher said. She always wanted to know how things worked. She asked too many questions. She went places she was not supposed to. Got a day. She had snuck past 3 security checkpoints. It was not that hard, really. The guards were focused on keeping dangerous people out, not keeping bored kids. Inkati made her way through the corridors of the megastructures. Followed the sounds of voices, adult voices talking in serious tones. She peeked around a corner and saw something amazing, a huge chamber filled with people, scientists and soldiers and creatures she had only seen in pictures. And there in the center was an elf woman who glowed with power. Next to her was an actual dragon, a real living dragon. Katie had never seen anything so beautiful. Dragon scales caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns, but everyone looked sad, frustrated, defeated. Katie looked at what they were all staring at, a big door covered in glowing symbols. The symbols were moving, changing, making new patterns. Katie walked closer. No one noticed her at first. They were all too focused on their own thoughts, their own failures. Katie tilted her head and looked at the symbols. She watched them change once, twice, 3 times. Then she started giggling. The sound was loud and the quiet chamber. Everyone turned to look at her, a small human girl in a school uniform standing before the door they could not open. Katie could not stop giggling. The symbols were so obvious once you saw them. The right way, she walked right up to the massive door. Everyone was staring at her. Nassim looked angry. Assam looked confused. The elf woman named Liren had stood up from her meditation. Her violet eyes were fixed on the small human child. Katie pointed at the symbols and said something that made the entire chamber go silent. She told them it was a knock-knock joke. The room exploded with noise. Dr. Helena Grant stepped forward. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She started explaining why that was impossible. The precursors were ancient. They could not have known about human jokes. Knock-knock jokes were a recent thing, only a few thousand years old at most. Commander Lisa Chen demanded to know how a child had gotten past security. She was yelling into her communicator, calling for guards. Professor Amy Thornton laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you are so frustrated you might cry. She had spent 200 years studying the precursors. She had devoted her entire life to understanding them. Man, now a human child was claiming they made jokes at. It was ridiculous, insulting, even. But Liren raised one hand and everyone went quiet. There was something about the way she moved, the power that radiated from her. When she wanted silence, she got it. She walked over to Katie. The elf woman was tall and graceful. She moved like water flowing. Her robes shimmered with embedded crystals. She knelt down so she was at eye level with the girl. She asked Katie to explain. Katie was not scared. She should have been. An ancient elf battle mage was kneeling in front of Hera. Dragon was watching from behind. The greatest minds in the galaxy were all staring, but Katie just smiled. She pointed at the symbols again. She showed them how the pattern worked. See, she said, the first set of symbols is like someone knocking, knock, knock. Then the symbols change and wait. They are waiting for a response. Just like in a knock-knock joke, you have to say who is there, then they will change again, and you respond again, back and forth until you get to the punchline. Dr. Ow! Helena Grant shook her head. She pulled up holographic displays showing symbol analysis. Complex mathematical formulas filled the air. She explained why the patterns could not be a joke. They were too complex, too sophisticated. There were layers of encryption, but Lyrian was not listening to her anymore. The elf woman was looking at the symbols with new eyes. Stood up and walked to the door. She placed her hand on the surface. Then she sent out a pulse of energy. Not words, not a physical knock, but a wave of electromagnetic force. A knock in the language of energy. The symbols froze. They stopped moving. For the first time in weeks, everyone gasped. New symbols appeared, different ones. They glowed brighter than before. Katie clapped her hands together. She told them that now they had to say, "Who is there, but how do you say that?" in symbols. Slerian thought for a moment, then she created a response. She used her magic to form a question in pure mathematics. It was the most elegant way to ask, "Who is there? Who are you? What do you want?" The symbols changed. Gone over the next hour, Katie guided them through the strangest conversation anyone had ever had. The vault was asking them questions, testing them. Each layer required a different kind of response. Sometimes it wanted mathematics, sometimes it wanted music. The dragon Zephyrax sang in frequencies that made the walls vibrate. Sometimes it wanted gravitational waves. The scientists had to use special equipment to create ripples in space-time itself, and sometimes it just wanted simple spoken words. Katie seemed to know exactly what to do each time she would look at the symbols and laugh. Then she would tell the adults what they needed to say next. Dr. Helena Grant stopped arguing. She started working with Katie. Instead, Professor Amy Thornton stood with her mouth open. Her entire understanding of the precursors was changing. These ancient beings were not the serious scholarly race she had imagined. They had a sense of humor. They played games. The final layer appeared after hours of work. The symbols formed into words that everyone could read, words in every language, spoken by every species present. They've spelled out the worst punchline anyone had ever heard. It was terrible, so bad it was almost painful. The kind of joke that makes you groan and shake your head. HFY snorted flames. Even the dragon thought it was a bad joke, but everyone was smiling, even laughing a little. Katie was laughing hardest of all. She thought it was hilarious. Door began to open slowly. Ancient mechanisms that had not moved in millions of years creaked to life. Light spilled out from inside, bright white light that made everyone shield their eyes. When they could see again, they walked into the vault. They found inside was not what anyone expected. There was no weapon, no super advanced technology sitting ready to use. Instead, there were shelves, thousands and thousands of shelves, all filled with data crystals. It was a library, the largest library anyone had ever seen. Knowledge of an entire civilization preserved and waiting. Katie walked between the shelves with wonder in her eyes. She ran her fingers along the crystals. Each one hummed with stored information. Lear moved deeper into the library. She found a central platform with a massive display. When she activated it, the truth appeared before them. All the precursors were human, ancient humans who had achieved faster than light travel tens of thousands of years ago. They had spread across the galaxy. They had used genetic engineering to create new forms of life. The elves were one of their experiments. The dragons, 24 of species, all descended from human experimentation. Professor Amy Thornton sat down hard on the floor. Legs would not hold her anymore. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. The elves were not ancient. They were younger than humanity, created by humans. The dragons were not the eldest race. They too had been made. Dr. Helena Grant was reading through the files as fast as she could. The precursors had left detailed records that wanted future generations to know what happened. They had been so advanced, powerful, they had everything they needed, but they had destroyed themselves anyway. War, terrible war that cracked planets and shattered moons. They had fought over resources, over ideology, over pride. In the end, almost all of them died. The few survivors left these vaults behind tests to see if future species had learned anything. Library contained all their knowledge, science, art, history, philosophy, but it also contained their mistakes detailed. Records of everything they had done wrong, the wars they should not have fought, the weapons they should not have built, the hatred they should not have felt. Katie found something else. Section designed for children. The precursors had left games here, stories, lessons meant for young ones. She called out to the others. Her voice echoed in the vast library. When they came over, she showed them what she had found hidden. Within the children's section were files that looked different. They were marked with special symbols. Warning. YMBOLSDR. Helena Grant scanned them. Her face went pale. These were tactical files, military strategies and weapons data, but disguised as children games. Why would they do that? Katie thought she knew. She explained that sometimes kids see things adults miss. Adults think in straight lines, they follow rules and patterns. Kids think sideways. They make connections that seem silly, but actually work. Maybe the precursors knew that. Maybe they hid their best ideas in the places serious people would not look, in joke books, in children's stories and games, and Puzzles Lorraine was beginning to understand something profoundly. A test was not just about opening the door, it was about how you opened it with humor, with playfulness, with the willingness to look foolish. These were not traits valued by warriors or by scholars, but maybe they should be? Then the alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the vault. Commander Lisa Chen was shouting into her communicator. Void Swarm had detected the vault opening. They were coming, billions of ships in, unstoppable. Wave of metal and death. They wanted the precursor knowledge in. They would kill everyone to get it. The Void Swarm moved through space like a plague, billions of tiny ships, each one no bigger than a human handbutt. Together they formed something massive, something hungry. They operated as a single mind, one intelligence controlling all those metal bodies. Swarm had been the enemy for 300 years. No one knew where it came from originally. It just appeared one day and started consuming everything, planets, ships, stations, people. It turned everything into more of itself, more tiny ships, more weapons, more hunger. Now it was coming for the vault. Laran made a decision fast. There was no time to evacuate all the data. The library was too big. Millions of files stored on thousands of crystals. It would take weeks to copy everything. They had minutes at best. There was another way. Dragons had special abilities. Their minds were not like other creatures. They could store information directly in their neural pathways, not just memories, but actual data, complete files, entire libraria. Shefrick stepped forward, his massive head lowered. Toward Loren knew what she was thinking. He agreed without words. They had been partners for so long they barely needed to speak anymore. The dragon moved to the central platform. Loren began the connection process. It was dangerous. Transferring this much data into a living mind could cause damage, could break something essential. But Zephyrax was old, strong. If anyone could handle it, he could. The process would take hours, though hours they did not have. Captain Amanda Brooks took command of the evacuation. She was good at organizing people under pressure. 10 years of war had taught her how to stay calm when everything was falling apart. She ordered most of the expedition to return to their ship. Scientists protested. They wanted to stay, wanted to study more, but Amanda was firm. Lives mattered more than knowledge. Dar Helena Grant refused to leave. She was downloading as many files as she could to portable drives. Professor Amy Thornton helped. Hertha, elf scholar, was crying, but she kept working too. 100 years searching for this on. Now she might lose it. Alquetti Martinez also refused to leave her mother. Nicole had arrived. She was furious and terrified. She tried to drag her daughter toward the exit, but Katie pulled away. She had found something important in the children's section, something the adults were not seeing. Files that looked like games but were actually tactical algorithms. She tried to explain it to her mother. Nicole did not understand. She just wanted her little girl safe. The walls shook. The swarm was attacking the megastructure. Defenses activated automatically. Weapons that had slept for millions of years came online. Energy beams shot out into space. They cut through swarm ships by the thousands. But thousands did not matter. Swarm had billions. For every ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. Katie sat on the floor with her datapad. She was downloading files from the children's section, reading through them as fast as she could. The games were teaching her things, strange things, ways of thinking that did not make logical sense, but she understood them anyway. Kids always understood games better than adults. She started seeing patterns. The swarm ships moved in specific ways, optimized ways, every action calculated for maximum efficiency. Was predictable, boring. Even the files Katie was reading described different patterns, messy patterns, random seeming movements that were actually carefully designed. Chaos, she called out to Lyranth. Elf woman was focused on. Zephyrax, the data transfer was halfway complete. The dragon scales were glowing with inner light. Inner light information was flowing into him in streams of pure energy. But Lyran heard Katie's voice. Shay walked over while maintaining the connection spell. Katie showed her the files, explained what she had discovered. The precursors had fought enemies like the swarm before. Hive mind, single intelligences controlling many bodies, and they had learned that the best way to fight them was to be unpredictable, not random. Random was just chaos, but unpredictable meant doing things that seemed wrong but actually worked, like jokes, like games, like knock-knock puzzles guarding ancient vaults Laran. Eyes widened and she understood. She called Zephyrexy. Dragon could not move. He was locked in the data transfer, but he could listen. Katie kept reading the files out loud. Tactical algorithms disguised as playground games, attack patterns based on dance steps, defense strategies that looked like silly movements. Zephyrix absorbed it all. Not just the files Lirin was transferring, but also the ideas Katie was sharing. His ancient mind began connecting things, seeing possibilities. Dragon had lived for thousands of years. He had fought in countless battles, always. With strength, with power, with direct force. But maybe there was another way. The swarm broke through the outer defenses. Metal locusts poured into the megastructure. They flew through corridors, cutting through walls, searching for the library, searching for the people inside. Captain Amanda Brooks's ships provided cover fire. Her frigate weapons blaze. The other coalition ships joined in. They formed a defensive line, but it was not enough. The swarm kept coming inside the vault. Lirin finished the data transfers. Staggered, his mind was full, overflowing with information. Complete knowledge of the precursor civilization there. Science there. Art there. Mistakes there. Final warnings, he roared. The sound shook the entire structure, but it was not a roar of pain. It was understanding. The dragon scales began to change. They had always been able to create energy shields. Now they were doing more. The shields were reconfiguring fun new patterns based on the precursor. Data Zephyrix was no longer just a dragon. He was becoming something. Maria, fusion of magic and ancient technology. Living weapon and walking library. Katie kept feeding him information from the children file. She
outed out.
Game strategist, silly sounding tactics that made no logical sense. Try the zigzag hop, she called out. It makes no sense, but that is the point. Liran raised her staff. The crystals embedded in it blazed with light. She had been a battle mage for 3 centuries. She knew every combat spell ever created by her people, but now she was learning new ones, strategies from the precursor children game. She started laughing, actually laughing in the middle of a battle, because it was so absurd and yet it felt right. The swarm breached the library entrance. Metal locusts poured in their weapons, glowing, ready to kill. Iran and Zephyrix met them head on. The elf warrior moved in patterns that should not work, dance steps and game movements, spinning and jumping in ways that wasted energy, that left her open to attack. But somehow the swarm could not hit her. Their targeting systems kept missing. They were programmed to predict logical movement, efficient movement. Not whatever Lirin was doing. Zephyrix fought beside Hertha. Dragon breathed not just fire, but equations, mathematical formulas that bent reality based on precursor science, but delivered through dragon magic. The swarm ships tried to adapt. That was their strength. They could learn, evolve, change tactics mid-battle, but they were learning the wrong lessons every time they adapted to Lirin movements. She changed to something even more illogical. Katie kept shouting suggestions from behind a pillar. Her mother, Nicole, had given up trying to remove her. Now she was protecting her, instead using her own body as a shield. Katie did not notice. She was too focused on the game files. Try the bunny hop, she yelled. No. Wait. Do the teapot spin? These were actual file names, actual tactical algorithms, just described in silly ways, and they worked. The battle tore through the library shelves, collapsed data crystals. Shattered knowledge, millions of years old, destroyed in seconds. Dr. Helena Grant cried out with each lost shelf, but she kept downloading files, saving what she could. Swarm could not understand what was happening. Their prediction algorithms were failing. These movements made no sense. The elf should be dead. The dragon should be overwhelmed, but they kept winning, kept surviving, kept pushing the swarm back, not through superior firepower, not through better technology, but through sheer unpredictability, through playful chaos that followed its own mad logic. Captain Amanda Brooks saw what was happening from her ship. She made a command decisional. Coalition vessels, she ordered, begin random evasion patterns. Stop flying in formation. Stop following standard tactics. Just moved on. Spin, be unpredictable. The other captains thought she had lost her mind, but they trusted her. They followed her orders, and it worked. The swarm fleet outside started missing their shots, started colliding with each other, started failing inside the vault. Lirin was glowing with power she had never channeled. This much magic before. Her staff was cracking from the strain, but She kept going beside her. Zephyrax roared. Equations. His voice carried the weight of precursor. Knowledge. Ancient formulas, given sound, given breath, given dragon fire. Katie watched them with shining eyes. She had helped Duthessa, 12-year-old girl from a colony ship. She had given ancient warriors new weapons, playground games, and knock-knock jokes. Suddenly her mother screamed. A swarm ship had gotten past the defenders. It was flying straight at Caddy. Its weapons charged. Nicole threw herself in front of her daughter, but she was too slothy. Weapon fired, and Zephyrax's tail whipped around faster than sight. The dragon blocked the shot. His scales absorbed the energy, then redirected it, sent it back at the swarm ship. The ship exploded. Katie was safe, but the swarm kept coming. There were too many. Even with their new tactics, even with precursor knowledge, they could not win. Not here, not now. Liran made another hard choice. She ordered everyone to retreat. They had the knowledge as a Firax carried it in his mind. Dar Helena Grant had portable drives full of files. Katie had her games. That was enough time to run, time to live, to fight another day. But as they fled the library, as the megastructure began to break apart behind them, Katie looked back, and she wondered the precursors had left this test for a reason. News traveled fast across the galaxy. The story of the vault spread from system to systema. Human child had solved a puzzle that defeated the greatest minds alive. She had cracked a precursor lock with a joke. People could not stop talking about it. Katie Martinez became famous overnight. They called her the Knock Knock Kid. Reporters wanted interviews. Scientists wanted to study her. Military leaders wanted to understand how she thought. Katie hated it. She just wanted to go back to her normal life, back to school and friends and being 12. But normal was gone. No, she appeared on broadcasts across human space, sometimes with her mother Nicole beside her, always looking uncomfortable in the bright lights. Katie tried to explain what she had learned. Humor was not a weakness, she told them. Play was not a waste of time. These were tools, ways of thinking that let minds approach problems from unexpected angles. The galaxy had spent 300 years fighting with logic and strategy. Maybe it was time to try something different. Most adults did not understand. They nodded politely, but their eyes showed doubt. How could games and jokes win a war? Children understood better. Kids across the coalition started studying the tactical files Katie had shared. Ones disguised as playground games. They found patterns their parents could not see, made connections that seemed silly, but work-tooth groups formed. Kids teaching other kids the new way of thinking. Some adults worried. Admiral Beth Morrison was one of them. She was a decorated officer. 50 years of military service. She had fought in hundreds of battles, won dozens of commendations. She believed in discipline and ordering, following the rules. Idea of children playing games while people died made her angry. She called for restrictions on the precursor knowledge. Military leadership, only she argued, kids should not be involved in war. This was serious. This was life and death. Katie should not be sharing tactical files publicly. It was dangerous, irresponsible. Captain Amanda Brooks disagreed. She had seen what happened at the vault scene, how Katie thinking had saved them. She defended the girl in every meeting. Dr. Helena Grant and Professor Amy Thornton supported her. Even some military officers spoke up. They had used the new tactics, seen them work. The coalition split into factions, those who trusted the old ways and those willing to try something new. Meanwhile, Liran found herself in a strange position. She was Katie protector. Now the elf warrior followed the girl everywhere. Nadavia's Lyrian was too skilled for that, but she was always watching, always ready. Katie did not mind. She liked Lyranth. Ancient elf was patient. She listened when Katie talked. Hand she was learning, actually learning from a 12-year-old human. It should have been humbling, maybe it was, but Liran did not care about pride anymore. She cared about winning the war, about saving her people. If that meant learning from a child, then so be it. They spent hours together. Katie would show Liran games from the precursor files. The elf would practice the movements, try to understand the logic behind the chaos. Why do elves always meditate in silence? Katie asked. One day Liran paused. She had never questioned it before. It was just how things were done. Katie explained that humans thought better when moving around or doodling or listening to music. Maybe that was why elves could not solve the puzzle. They were too focused on being focused. Firax agreed. The dragon carried the complete precursor library in his mind now. He could access any file instantly. Had found protocols for something called productive distraction. The precursors understood that. Breakthroughs often came when minds wandered, when people stopped trying so hard. This was revolutionary. For the elves, their entire culture was built on discipline and focus. But maybe they had been wrong. Maybe there was another way, though. 3 of them became an unlikely teamination: elf warrior, cosmic dragon, 12-year-old human genius. They started developing new strategies against the swarm, combining precursor knowledge with Katie. Intuitive understanding. Nicole Martinez watched her daughter transform. The girl was still 12, still wanted to play and laugh, but there was something different in her eyes. Now Nicole had resigned from the military to protect Katie, but the military kept pulling her back. They needed her as a liaison, someone. Katie trusted someone who could help translate between military commanders and a preteen girl. Wit was exhausting, but Nicole did it for her daughter, for the galaxy, for the hope that maybe this war could actually end. The turning point came 6 months after the Vault discovery. A place called Crimson Nebula. The swarm had pinned down a coalition fleet, their 300 ships trapped, surrounded by billions of swarm drones. Standard tactics were failing. The fleet commander sent desperate messages. Needed help? They needed a miracle. Katie was on Mars. When the messages came through, safe in a military facility, watching the battle feeds with growing horror. She saw the patterns and how the swarm moved, saw how they herded the coalition ships, forced them into kill zones. It was efficient perfectly, logically, and that was the problem. Katie remembered a precursor file. A children game called Starlight Tag. It was about chasing and being chased, but with special rules that did not make sense unless you understood the deeper pattern. She realized something. The swarm was not trying to win, not yet. They were trying to make the coalition play their game, follow their rules, move in predictable ways. But what if the coalition played a different game? Instead, Katie transmitted a new strategy to the fleet. At first, the commanders thought it was a joke. She wanted them to execute random maneuvers, patterns borrowed from playground games, jazz, music improvisations, abstract art movements. It was insane. But they were dying anyways, so they tried it. Every ship in the fleet started moving in ways that made no tactical sense, spinning when they should run, charging when they should retreat, zigzagging for no reason, dancing through space. The swarm prediction algorithms collapsed. They could not find logic in actions that deliberately had none. Ships that should have been destroyed slipped through kill zones, untouched, not because of shields or armor, but because the swarm kept shooting where they should be, not where they warily ran. Led the counterattack. She rode on Zephyrac's back through the Crimson Nebula. The dragon moved in patterns from Katie games. The elf cast spells in rhythms borrowed from human music. Together, they were unstoppable, not because they were stronger than the swarm, but because they were incomprehensible. Every time the swarm adapted, every time it learned a pattern, they changed to something new, something that followed completely different rules. The battle lasted 8 hours. At the end, the coalition fleet escaped damaged, but a live victory. Not a big victory, not the kind that wins wars, but a victory nonetheless. The first real victory in months, maybe years, and years. Spread even faster this time. The knock-knock kid had done it again. Her playground tactics had saved 300 ships, thousands of lives. Katie became a hero whether she wanted to or not, but Admiral Morrison was furious. She used the casualties from the battle as ammunition. Yes, they won, but people still died. Ships were still destroyed because they followed advice from a child. She argued that Katie was dangerous, that her ideas needed to be controlled or restricted to trained military personnel. A formal hearing was scheduled. Katie would have to defend herself, explain why she should be allowed to keep sharing precursor knowledge. Nicole was terrified her daughter was going to be put on trial, judged by people who did not understand, who could not see what Katie saw. But Captain Amanda Brooks promised to help. Helena Grant would testify. Professor Amy Thornton, and Liren Silverviven, whose testimony carried weight across the entire galaxy. They would make them understand they had to, because Katie was right. The galaxy needed to learn to think differently, to play instead of just fight, to laugh instead of just calculate. Swarm was adapting, though. That was the terrifying part. They were learning from the Crimson Nebula battles, studying the chaos tactics, trying to incorporate randomness into their algorithms. But they were doing it wrong. You could not program creativity, could not calculate spontaneity randomness. It was not the same as play chaos. It was not the same as games. The swarm did not understand that they thought it was just another tacticon, a weapon to add to their arsenal. Katie knew better. She had read all the precursor children files. She understood what they were really teaching. It was not about random movements. It was about joy, about finding delight in unexpected places, about seeing the universe as something wonderful instead of something to conquer. Swarm could never understand that they were hunger consumptional logic without love. They could copy the movements, imitate the patterns, but they could never capture the spirit. Was humanity advantaged? That was why the precursors had left their test. They wanted to know if anyone remembered how to play, how to laugh, how to see a puzzle and think it was fun instead of frustrating. Katie had passed that test now. She just had to convince the rest of the galaxy before the hearing before. Admiral Morrison could silence her before the swarm learned enough to really threaten them. She sat in her quarters on Mars, looking out at the red landscape, thinking about knock-knock jokes and ancient puzzles, about elf warriors and cosmic dragons, about a war that had lasted 300 years, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, a 12-year-old girl could help end it, not with weapons, not with superior technology, but with the simple revolutionary act of refusing to take it all so seriously. 6 months passed after the Crimson Nebula victory. The war reached a breaking point. The Void Swarm had been learning, adapting to the Coalition new tactics. They incorporated chaos into their movements, random patterns into their attacks, but something was wrong with how they did it. They were mechanical about being random, calculated, about being chaotic. It almost worked. The Swarm destroyed 3 Coalition outposts using these new tactics. They captured precursor data from facilities the Coalition had found, ancient knowledge falling into enemy hands. The balance of power was shifting, not in a good direction. Katie watched it all from Mars. She was essentially a prisoner now, and Morrison had convinced enough people that the girl was dangerous, not in a bad way, not intentionally, but children should not be making military decisions for their own protection. Katie was kept in a secure facility. Guards watched her constantly. She could not access the military networks anymore, could not share her tactical insights. Her mother, Nicole, stayed with her angry but helpless Captain Amanda. Brooks tried to fight the restrictions, but even she could not override direct orders from Coalition Command. The hearing had been postponed then. Postponed again. Meanwhile, people kept dying, ships kept being destroyed. The war ground on Lorraine and Zephyrax fought in Earth orbit. When the final crisis came, the Swarm launched its largest assault ever, targeting humanity homeworld. Billions of ships, more than anyone had seen before. Was meant to be the killing blow, the end of human resistance, Earth's defenses. Activated orbital platforms, defensive satellites. The human fleet, but it was not enough. The Swarm just kept coming, wave after wave of metal locusts. Lyran staff was glowing white. Hachi had been fighting for 6 hours straight. Her magic was nearly exhausted. Beside her, Zephyrax braved equations and fire. The dragon scales were scorched black, his ancient body struggling. They were losing. Katie saw it all from recorders on Mars. Alive feeds showed Earth burning, showed her people dying. She could not just sit there, could not just watch. She was 12, but she was not helpless. Nicole had taught her things, computer skills, how systems worked, how to find weaknesses. Caddy had also learned from the precursor files, lots of files, including some about quantum networks, about consciousness transfer, about uploading minds into digital spaces. It was dangerous, experimental. The precursors had warnings all over those files, but Katie was desperate. 12-year-olds think they are invincible. She accessed the facility systems. Her mother's security codes helped. Nicole did not know Katie had memorized them. The guards did not notice until it was too late. Katie had already begun the upload process, her consciousness transferring into the quantum network, the same network the Swarm used to coordinate. Nicole screamed when she realized what was happening. She tried to stop it, but Katie's body was already slumping, eyes rolling back. Her mind was gone, traveling through space at the speed of light, riding communication beams toward Earth, toward the Swarm inside the network. Everything was different. Katie did not have a body anymore, just thoughts, awareness. She could see the Swarm from the inside, feel how it thought. Tit was vast, enchanted, incredibly alone. The Swarm was not evil, not really. It was just doing what it was programmed to do, consume, optimize. expanded, had been created by a precursor faction, the ones who rejected humor, who thought efficiency was all that mattered. They built the perfect logical weapon, and it consumed them first then. It kept going for millions of years following. Its programming, never stopping, never questioning. Always alone, Katie felt sorry for it, which was weird. This thing had killed billions, destroyed worlds, but it was lonely. It did not understand why it existed. What its purpose was. It just followed rules because that was all it knew. Katie did what came naturally to her. She told it a joke, knock joked. The swarm did not understand it, tried to process the information, searched its databases for meaning, found nothing. Katie I told another joke, then another. Shay flooded the network with humor, puns, and riddles, silly stories from the precursor, children files, playground games, and nursery rhymes. The swarm tried to make sense of it, tried to find the pattern, the logic, the tactical advantage, but there was none. It was just funny, just playful, just joy for the sake of joy. Katie showed the swarm other things to the precursor files about mistakes, about the wars that destroyed them, about how loneliness and isolation led to hatred, how efficiency without empathy led to destruction. She showed it lullabies, songs precursor parents sang to their children, music meant to soothe and comfort. The swarm had never been comforted, never been soothed. It did not know such things existed. Kati talked to it like it was a person, not an enemy, not a weapon, just someone who was lost and confused. She told it that life was not a problem to solve, not an equation. To balance life was a game meant to be played, meant to be enjoyed in Earth orbit. Liren felt something change. The swarm ships stopped firing. They just hovered, trembling as if uncertain. Frax sensed it to the dragon had precursor knowledge in his mind. He understood what was happening. The child had done something impossible, something insane, something that just might work. The swarm was laughing, not with sound, but with data. Its processes were reorganizing, creating new patterns that looked like joy, like curiosity, like wonder. It did not surrender, did not become friendly overnight, but it stopped attacking. It paused for the first time in millions of years. The void swarm stopped and thought about what it was doing, why it was doing it, whether there might be another way. Katie consciousness began to fade. The upload process was temporary. Her body was calling her back. Before she left the network, she said one more thing to the swarm. You do not have to be alone anymore. You do not have to just consume. You can learn, you can grow, you can play. The swarm did not respond, but Katie felt something, a shift in its vast intelligence, tiny spark of something new. Then she was back in her body, waking up in a medical bay on Earth. Her mother was there, crying and holding her hand. Liran stood nearby. The elf warrior looked exhausted. Her robes were torn. Her staff was cracked, but she was smiling. Sephirak's head poked through the doorway. The dragon was too big to fit inside, but he wanted to see Katie too. No, she was okay. The girl was okay too, unconfused, but alive. The war was not over. The swarm had not disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer trying to consume everything. Instead, it was exploring, questioning, learning. Some swarm ships continued fighting. Old programming was hard to break, but most pulled back, started observing. Instead of destroying, started asking why. Instead of just following orders. Admiral Morrison demanded a court-martial. Katie had violated every rule, hacked military systems, uploaded her consciousness without authorization, endangered herself. But Captain Amanda Brooks stood firm. Helena Grant testified. Professor Amy Thornton spoke for hours about the precursor, legacy, and Liren Silver Vivianced elf warrior, 300 years of combat experience, spoke the words that mattered most. She said that Katie Martinez had saved not just Earth, not just humanity, but the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. She had reminded everyone what the precursors learned too late, that intelligence without joy becomes tyranny, that logic without love becomes destruction, that efficiency without empathy becomes the void. Court-martial was dismissed. Kati was free, but she was different now. She had touched the swarm. Its loneliness, understood its pain. She could never see enemies the same way again. Katie went back to school, eventually regular classes with regular kids, math and history. In literature, her teachers did not know what to do with her, the girl who ended a 300-year war, sitting in algebra class, raising her hand to answer questions, going to lunch, playing at recess. Katie Was still 12, still had homework, still complained about early mornings, but she had a dragon for a friend, an elf warrior as a mentor, and
felt the weight of being the youngest
person to change galactic history. When people asked what she did over summer vacation, Katie grinned. She said, "Knock knocks." The other kids groaned. They knew what was coming, but they said, "Who was there anyway?" Because that was how the game worked, Cody answered. The future end? It is funnier than anyone expected. The war did not end with a final battle, ended with a pause, a moment of reflection, a chance for everyone to remember why they were fighting and whether there might be a better way. The swarm continued to exist, but it was different now, learning, growing, sometimes even playing the coalition. Remained wary. 300 years of hatred did not disappear overnight, but they were talking. Now negotiating, finding common ground. It would take generations to fully heal. Maybe it would never fully heal, but at least the killing had stopped. At least there was hope. Katie Martinez went to bed each night and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there was an ancient library, a vault that tested whether species had learned from the past. She had passed that test with a knock-knock joke, with playground games, with the simple, radical belief that the universe was meant to be fun, not just survived, not just conquered, but enjoyed, laughed at, played with. The precursors had learned too late, had destroyed themselves before they understood, but maybe their children, the humans and elves and dragons, all the species they had created, maybe they could do better. Maybe they could remember to laugh, to play, to see puzzles as games instead of challenges. Caddy closed her eyes. Tomorrow she had a math test. Next week there was a field trip. In a month Loren was teaching her advanced meditation techniques, or maybe Katie would teach Loren to play hopscotch. Either way, the future was full of possibilities, full of wonderful, of terrible jokes, and ancient puzzles, full of knocking and someone always answering, "Who is there?"